If you are going through a spiritual awakening and you haven't been through this phase yet, my guess is that your life is pretty messy right now. This is normal. Perhaps problems that you could previously sweep under the rug are now staring you in the face. Perhaps you've hit some really serious roadblocks. Again, this is something that almost all that are going through an awakening experience, especially in the beginning. But there are a few things that you can do to make things easier. And today I'm here to share with you things that I wish I knew when I started to wake up. Hello from Sweden and welcome to Everyday Mystic, a channel about God, freedom and spiritual awakening. In today's video, I'm going to be brutally honest with you, both about what you have ahead of you and about my own journey. But I am also here to give you a lot of hope, because this is leading somewhere. You are not going to just be left hanging in this. And if you think about it, you know somewhere that you can't approach your experiences, what is happening as you are going through this process, in the same manner that you've approached life so far. Because you are waking up to that reality is much more than we can perceive with the five senses. That we are not these little meat sacks with brains in them, but instead that we are multidimensional beings, that at the absolute core we are all one and we are all parts of God's infinite consciousness. And you are also beginning to learn a lot about yourself and about reality that were previously hidden to you. All of these things are things that your brain sort of has to catch up with. Because your brain thinks that it can go on just like it has used to do. And that is not viable anymore. How your path looks is individual. Everyone's path is unique when it comes to this. But there are a few things, such as this problem awareness phase, that are pretty much universal to people going through a spiritual awakening. So how did this look for me? Well, back when I was 23, this is 20 years ago, I got my initial little nudge, but pretty soon thereafter I went basically back to sleep again, and it was not until 7 years ago when I met my wife that I truly started to wake up to what is going on. And what happened then was that I had some money, I lost all of the money, about $100,000, and I went into debt, and I realized that I did not have my life in order whatsoever. I thought I knew what I was doing, but I had poorly defined goals and vision. I was even trying to live someone else's goals and vision, or what I imagined a successful lifestyle would look like. I had a false self-image. A self-image of a person that had things together. I thought that my life was great, but as soon as the emotions that I had been pushing down throughout my whole life started to well up in me, I started to feel pretty bad, I could say. I went into a depression for a while. I felt like nothing is ever going to get better. And I started to discover a lot of nasty habits that I had before been able to just turn a blind eye towards. I started to see how I was inauthentic, disingenuous. I started to see all of these nasty habits in my thinking, speaking, and acting. I, for example, realized that, and mind you, this is something that I was unconscious of. I discovered that I could be manipulative, and I didn't even know it. And this is actually something that can be quite interesting when we start to wake up. When we start to really observe ourselves. Namely that we see things that in many instances are obvious to other people. But we are totally clueless to them. And sometimes we are even scheming in a rather elaborate way, completely unaware of what we are doing. Of course, when we are doing it, there is usually a little voice in the back of our heads that are telling us that, are your motives really what you are telling yourself that they are? But it takes a while to start to listen to this voice as well. My point is that my awakening was on one part amazing. I started to get true confirmations of things that I had only believed and suspected. I started to have these incredible spiritual experiences, but my life also fell apart. And this is actually something that is quite important to think about. Because this is at least my experience. When you are struggling financially, when you are scared, when you don't know how you are going to pay your bills, and all of these things, it doesn't really matter that you are having these amazing spiritual experiences. It doesn't really matter that you know that life will go on after this life is over and so on. Because your ego will pull your attention to it and it will drag it towards this 3D material reality. It will point to all of the things that you perceive as going wrong. But as I said, this is leading somewhere. And I know you can sense it, you can feel it. You can feel that you are on your way to something higher. You can feel that there is more to this than just chance, hard work, in the hope of things getting better and so on, but with no real guarantees. Not that I can say 100% absolutely sure that you have guarantees when it comes to this life. But things are most definitely not random. Things are part of a higher order. Things are going somewhere. We are waking up, and this awakening is something real. It is leading to a shift on the planet, whether we have a major part to play in it or not. So, these are things that I wish I knew when I started to wake up. A lot of people are suffering unnecessarily because even though they start to sense that there is something to this, that they are not just imagining things, there are still so many things that are unsure when we come into this. We are learning a whole new way of interacting with reality, of interacting with ourselves, and of interacting with other people. We are learning that in order to make things happen, we are not confined to this 3D material reality with struggles and cause and effect anymore. But when we are starting to approach life from a higher state, there is also delay in it. Things are not just magically manifesting. We might get into contact with some law of attraction teachings that make us think that, we can just sit on our sofa and manifest. Mind you, I believe in some version of the law of attraction. If you want to get into a little deeper with this, I think that the book Reality Transurfing is probably one of the best books at explaining how this works. But there is much more complexity to this, and one very important part of it is that for making any of this work you need to take action. And you don't only need to take action, you need to take some sort of intelligent action. Not that you have to have things figured out, but you need to be a little conscious, you need to grow in what you are doing. But the important part of this, I would say, is that it brings the power back to you. You are not just subject to the whims of the world. You can affect this by doing inner work, by working on yourself, by observing yourself first and foremost. Because we begin to change things inside simply by observing them. And I can actually give a rather rational explanation as to how this works. We begin, I could say, with a willingness to change something. Then you have this whole inertia within that is trying to keep you in old familiar patterns, where you just keep reacting to your experiences in the same way, and thus continue to create the same experiences over and over again. You need to get out of the familiar patterns. But you first have to observe the patterns, you have to see the patterns. And usually when we make choices that are not for our highest good, it's not just about a lack of self-discipline. A lot of it is simply that we just forget about what we are doing. But every time that we observe ourselves acting in this manner, we are increasing the chance that we are going to make a different choice in the future. As long as we stay committed to change. This does not even have to be particularly effortful. It just means to acknowledge that next time my intention is to make a different choice from the one I did right now. Next, I also want to talk a little bit about the self-blame aspect of this, because when we are waking up, we usually start to beat ourselves up pretty badly. We ask, how could I allow myself to end up in this situation where I have to dig myself out of this hole that I have dug for myself, with all of these choices that just spiral down, down, down before we actually wake up and realize what we are doing. And at least for me, what I also started to see was that I was not very successful in the eyes of society. But this is also something false, because we have been conditioned to equate success with financial success, material success, professional success. And my advice to you, if you are going through a spiritual awakening, is to stop allowing society to define the conditions of success for you. If you are going through a spiritual awakening, you have already succeeded. And think about this. Spiritual reality is so much more than we can perceive with the five senses. Even if this life is painful, even if it's fraught with a lot of struggle still, I would not trade this awakening for a billionaire life where I don't have access to the spiritual side of things. Because, as it is, the spiritual side of reality is so much grander than anything you can achieve and acquire in the physical 3D reality. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't want things, it doesn't mean that we should not enjoy the good things in life in this existence. We are here to live in the 3D reality. We are here to have a physical human experience. But in the grander scheme of things, this little experience is just an infinitesimal little blip on the whole spectrum of experience that you are going to encounter as you go through your journey as a soul. And you are starting to see through the illusions that blind most people. I would like to propose that this is infinitely greater than having a successful career, for example. So as you are going through this journey, an important thing if you want to make it easier is to be honest with yourself. This is not so easy because we can often say to ourselves, well, I would never lie to myself. But the thing is, and this is what I was talking about in the beginning, we have such a great capacity to delude ourselves, to sweep our problems under the rug, to, on the one hand, tell us that I'm prepared to look at everything in my life. But when the really dark, shameful things start to come up, and believe me, in my life they certainly did, then we are not so willing to look at them. Shame, for example, is an absolutely horrible emotion to confront. And in many instances, we will have to do just that. I've had to confront a really shameful past. I'm not going to go into detail about it. I might do it in the future if anyone is interested, and quite frankly, if the channel grows a little more, because I don't want to be this personal at this stage of this channel's evolution. But to be clear, I was not one of these people that grew up as a very mature child. I was not one of those people who in my teens and early 20s and so on grew up to a person whose biggest problem was that I was a little bit too nice. As many other people, awakened people that I see, say that this was their problem. No, I was a really chaotic person. I did a lot of stuff that we are not supposed to talk about on YouTube if we want the algorithm to still promote our channel and so on. But things that were not so much in the confinement of the law, you could say. I think you could guess basically what I was doing. And I was not a very nice person. I had a very dark, nihilistic, destructive philosophy of life. I saw life as completely meaningless. And since I saw life as completely meaningless, I didn't care if I stayed alive any longer or not. And I didn't really care if I hurt other people either. Because in the grander scheme of things, everything is just a pointless movement basically, and there is no greater meaning to anything, so we can just go ahead and do whatever we want basically. That was my philosophy of life, and it governed my actions, it governed how I treated other people, and it governed how I treated myself as well. And when you have this type of past, you also create patterns of how you behave and interact with people. Patterns that will not just go away because you are starting to find new meaning in life. Because, as I stated earlier, the brain wants to keep us in what is familiar. So when we start challenging these patterns, we start to feel uncomfortable, and this discomfort heart, if we are not aware of what is going on, is going to start creating thoughts that make excuses for us staying just where we are, instead of evolving out of the patterns that we have created. This is actually another thing that I wish I knew when I woke up. How our brains are keeping us in what is familiar. And how our brains are doing this through our thoughts. First, the body starts to signal that something is going on here. I don't like it. This is not the usual way that we feed our patterns and feed our emotions. You have to do something, and then the thoughts start to spin, start to make up all kinds of explanation as to why we should not change. So, be honest with yourself. Try to take the lessons that life is giving you openly. This is another thing. When life is showing us these things that we need to look at. As I said, the first reaction is resistance, but not only that. We are often also feeling that we are being punished, that life is unfair, that life is unjust. And so we start cursing existence. This is something that I've done. I've cursed existence, I've cursed myself, I've cursed other people. I have been so angry at everyone and everything because of the pain that I felt when I started to become confronted with all of this. And it's important to realize that this is a natural part of the journey. But as soon as we see through it, we can start to also transcend it in a constructive manner. Also in this, forgive yourself. Forgive your mistakes. You did the best you could with where you were at the time. And this even goes for my horrible younger self, or quote unquote horrible. Because I had my reasons for being who I was. I lost my mother at a young age. I was bullied in school. I came into contact with very dark philosophies. I started to read the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey and so on. And I encountered this as a very confused young person that felt totally lost in life and had put up this huge shield around myself to protect myself against the world and against other people. This is at least how I try to see it, but I can still beat myself up. I can still judge myself. I can still feel fear of being judged even if I don't believe in a judgmental God. Because these patterns are not logical. These patterns are not things that we can just release immediately. And this is something to think about in your own journey. Just because you are starting to become more aware, just because you are starting to have a higher perspective of things, your ego will still pull you down into the old ways of thinking. Your ego will still trigger old fears even if you don't believe in them anymore. I am getting out of a lot of these things right now. That is why I can sit here and have a more objective perspective on them than I had just a few years ago. I am beginning to really see life with a lot more clarity today. I should have probably honestly waited a little bit before I started this YouTube channel, for example. The thing is that I started to have a lot of really crazy experiences. And I started to have sort of an ego inflation in relation to these experiences. I'm being very honest and open right now. I thought that just because I had these experiences, it meant that I had things figured out, I knew what I wanted to say, and so on. Today I think I'm starting to figure a few things out for real. And my mission, to a large extent, is to look at what is hidden in plain sight in the human experience, because believe me, there are so many things to look at here. That was the weird thing, because when I was younger, I was very much lost in everything outside of the human experience, outside of the present moment. I was not particularly interested in what was going on in the 3D reality and in our physical human experience. And now I find endless fascination in all of the things that are going on that we are not aware of. Just for example, how thoughts work. This is something that has interested me for many years now. Because, as you know, most people have this unconscious idea that they are their thoughts. And a lot of people are not even aware that they cannot stop thinking, and so on. Just to mention two things that are hidden in plain sight for most people when it comes to their direct experience. So this is where I have been called, and I believe that there is some meaning to this. So for me, today I think I can actually sit here and say that I at least am not guessing. The things that I'm talking about, I actually know something about. And this is also my message to you when it comes to this. I know that all of this is probably quite confusing. We are going through a time where, I cannot say this for sure, but I truly believe that most, if not all, of humanity are destined to wake up in the time that we are living in now. Which means that there are a lot of souls that are still asleep that are destined to wake up in this lifetime. Which also means that there are a lot of people out there that probably are feeling kind of scared and confused right now. They look out into the world and they see all the chaos. They look at their own lives and they see the chaos in their own lives. And you might be like me also, that you wonder, how am I ever going to manage my life in a way that where I actually can stand prepared for what is coming in the world with all the chaos that you are seeing? But remember this. This reality is not what it appears to be. And we cannot approach reality from the perspective that we have done before. It's not just struggle, cause and effect and so on. There are higher ways of doing this. And I don't have everything figured out when it comes to this, but this is what I am betting on. Of course, take action, but also trust in the higher order. Trust that there is a plan, trust that this is going somewhere, trust that you are essentially carried through this by God in one way or another. Trust that things are actually unfolding in the way that they are supposed to, even if it doesn't seem like that at the moment. And if you can do this, because this is where I am right now, it's been 7 years since I met my wife. I don't think I've been really suffering so much the last 2 years. But 5 years of more or less pretty intense suffering. And 2 years where I still have my bouts with suffering, but it's really becoming clearer and clearer, and I start to see the proverbial and very cliched light at the end of the tunnel. There is also another component to this. Things have to happen below the surface at first. Because essentially, when you strip this experience down to the absolute core, everything is energy and vibration. And what you are experiencing with your five senses is just that. A five-sense sensory experience. You don't really know anything about reality apart from what your senses are telling you. This is quite interesting to think about because this is another thing that is hidden in plain sight. You don't know anything about reality apart from what your five senses are telling you. And often even your five senses are creating illusions for you. And then you have the thoughts that distort this information that comes in even further, and so on and so on. What this means in practical terms is that, and this is actually something that physics are showing us as well, what is actually matter is just 0.00000 something 1%. The rest is empty space. We are basically living in a hologram. So, why am I talking about all of this? Because this shows that reality is not what it appears to be. And it also shows, therefore, that we can learn to work with reality in a way that is not tied to the old ways of doing things. And there are little clues out there. I would say, for example, check out the 7 Hermetic Principles. Check out Reality Transurfing. And why not check out Eckhart Tolle's works as well? There are a lot of works that are pointing to how you can actually have a more conscious approach when it comes to how you treat your life, how you treat reality, and so on. You can learn these things. These things can actually be exciting to learn as well. And you don't have to really be afraid of anything that is happening, because in the end, even though you can get hurt, even though things can go really bad when it comes to your human experience, fundamentally you are safe, because when you leave this place you are just going back to God. You are going to another type of existence, even if we don't know exactly what this existence is. There is nothing in this reality that you absolutely have to do or figure out. So you can afford to be a little bold. You can afford to take some risks, some chances. And if you are going through a spiritual awakening, this is definitely something that you are being called to do. So therefore, with all of this being said, don't lose faith in yourself and don't lose faith in the process. Realize this. The ego cannot understand what is going on. The ego will always drag your focus down into the 5-sense 3D reality. No matter how many amazing spiritual experiences that you are having. But if you observe yourself carefully in this process, you will also see that there is something in you that is changing. If you look back at yourself just 6 months from now, while the problems might still be there, while some things might even be probably even are worse than they are right now, you will also see that there is another side of you that has grown as well. Something in you has grown and matured. But this takes time because the ego protests, the ego kicks and screams, the ego wants to maintain control. And this is also a reason why things might seem worse sometimes. Because the ego can, and this has happened to me, so trust me, the ego can pull you down into states of both self-loathing and states of self-pity, where you feel that like you're just a total mess and the world is against you, basically. This is how I felt a lot of times. But there also has been this observer part of me that has grown stronger. I have seen, for example, how I've been able to, while I have gone into these tirades of, oh poor me, oh I suck and so on, there has also been a part of me that has, in somewhat bewilderment, observe all of these things happening. And the more you are starting to let go of these lower aspects, the stronger this observer self becomes. Therefore, don't lose faith in yourself and the process. Realize that we all have our individual journeys with our egos. Realize that this is leading somewhere. And you get a lot of confirmations of this. Synchronicities, spiritual experiences, people that seem to show up out of nowhere that have something to do with your journey and so on and so forth. All of these things are pointing to that something more is going on. But your ego is going to try to convince you that no, everything is random, everything can go anywhere it wants to, and you are basically alone in the world and have no real help whatsoever, and all of this spiritual stuff is highly doubtful and so on. This is things that the ego will tell you, and the more you can see through this, the more you can realize that the ego has no clue what is going on, and you will fix nothing by acting in the world through the ego. The more you can see through all of this, the less suffering you will encounter. But trust me, there is a point to all of this. Things are not random. There is a plan. And the future, no matter how it looks right now, in one way or another is bright. You know this on some level. You know that this is real and that it is leading somewhere. And that is where we are going to stop this very long video today. If you found this video useful, like, subscribe, comment, share the video and so on. All of these things help the channel to grow. And check out the description and the comment section for other things that me and my wife are doing. I will leave a couple of links to a few videos on my other channel, Internet Mystic Database, which is made with a lot of AI, but there is also a human touch to everything. It's not this just putting out a lot of junk on the internet that has nothing to do with me, no. I use my own skill, experience and knowledge in every single video, but I have the AI do the groundwork for me that it can do better than I can. So that is how I do that channel. And one video that I especially want to point you to is the video about how to relax your nervous system. Because if there is one thing that is very important in this process, it is just that. To relax your nervous system. Because if you are like most people, if you are like me, especially like me, because I've suppressed so many things throughout my life. This means that you have an agitated nervous system. You are probably walking around in more or less constant fight or flight mode. And you need to start to pay attention to this process inside your body, and you need to start learning how to relax. So you can disconnect from the sympathetic nervous system and connect to the parasympathetic nervous system, where healing and repair is taking place, and where you are also able to cope with your experiences in a much more constructive manner. So check out that video, check out the other videos, and other than that, just sincerely thank you for your time.